Usually at the end of a long day, when you walk up to your front door and you turn the key, you step inside your hallway and you throw that heavy metal deadbolt.
Yeah, the best feeling.
Right. There is this profound, almost like biological expectation of safety. It's a very binary way we view the world, I think.
Oh, totally. The dangerous, chaotic, unpredictable world is out there, right? On the street.
Exactly. But in here, you are secure. The perimeter is set.
It is the foundational architecture of modern life. We really crave that visible boundary. We want the walls to represent this impermeable shield against whatever anxieties are just sort of lurking outside.
Yeah. But then you step into the world of American Gothic literature. And specifically, you step into the mind of the author we are deep diving into today.
Yeah, and that deadbolt doesn't sound so great anymore.
No. Suddenly, the sound of that deadbolt sliding into place does not feel reassuring. In fact, it sounds like a trap springing shut. Because the domestic landscape we're looking at today is, well, it's just utterly terrifying.
It's the quintessential realization that, the call is coming from inside the house.
Yes. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening, we are looking at a truly massive stack of sources today, all focused on exploring the life, the legacy, and the incredibly complex literary genius of Shirley Jackson.
And to do this justice, we really had to pull from a very rich, diverse set of materials.
We really did. We have a deep biographical profile from Literary Mama. We have extensive encyclopedic histories that map out her life and, the explosion of her notorious short story, The Lottery.
Which is a whole situation in itself.
Oh, a massive situation. We also have the actual Library of Congress finding aid for her personal archives, which, by the way, gives us the literal blueprints of her brain.
It's fascinating to look at.
It really is. And finally, we are examining this brilliant academic reassessment of her masterpiece, The Haunting of Hill House, and that was published in the Irish Journal of Gothic and Horror Studies.
The diversity of those sources is, honestly, it's practically a requirement if you want to understand her.
Right.
Because you're dealing with a woman who lived a deeply, deeply fractured existence.
Right, and that is the mission for us today. We are deconstructing the duality of Shirley Jackson. Think about this. In the 1950s, she was famous across America for writing these hilarious, deeply relatable chronicles of chaotic motherhood.
Pieces published in, glossy magazines. Good housekeeping.
Yeah, good housekeeping. She was the witty mom writing about the laundry, yet at the exact same time, sitting at the exact same typewriter, she was operating as the 20th century's absolute master of American Gothic horror.
Which just looks like a massive contradiction. You try to map the PTA bake sales and the missing sneakers onto demonic psychic manifestations and ritualistic stonings.
Right.
And the brain just struggles to reconcile the two.
It does. But the aha moment we are driving toward today, and I promise you this will fundamentally change how you view the concept of your own home, is that these seemingly opposed identities were born from the exact same internal tension.
Yeah, that's the key.
Jackson took the hidden architecture of female care, the unspoken resentments of domestic life, and the desperate desire for isolation, and she encoded all of it into classic ghost stories. She took the haunted house trope, turned it completely upside down, and just shook it.
To really grasp the mechanics of how she pulled that off, though, we have to look at the soil she was planted in.
Okay, let's do that.
Because the expectations placed upon her from, the very moment she was born were just suffocatingly rigid.
Let's wind the clock back a bit. So she was born Shirley Hardy Jackson in San Francisco. Officially, she was born on December 14th, 1916.
Though she often claimed 1919.
Right, yeah. Just to appear younger than the man she eventually married, Stanley Edgar Hyman. But looking at her origins, she came from this affluent, incredibly conventional background.
Very high society.
Very. Her mother, Geraldine, was the kind of woman who traced her family heritage directly back to the Revolutionary War hero, General Nathaniel Greene.
And her great-great-grandfather was a prominent architect building mansions for California millionaires. So imagine the atmosphere in that house.
Just drenched in pedigree.
Drenched in pedigree, in social expectation, in this rigid performance of upper-middle-class perfection.
And Shirley was the ultimate anti-debutante. From day one, she was a misfit in that environment. Her mother wanted a daughter who was conventional, pretty, someone who would seamlessly integrate into the country club scene,
Marry a suitable stockbroker.
Exactly. But Shirley struggled with her weight. She didn't have that bubbly, effortless social grace her mother demanded. And worst of all, in her mother's eyes, Shirley wanted to sit in her room and write.
The sources, especially her brother Barry's recollections, they paint a really painful picture of this. Geraldine made absolutely no secret of the fact that she favored Barry over Shirley.
Which is just brutal.
It is. She was horrified by her daughter's eccentricity.
Right.
And you have to understand the psychological weight of that. Having an overbearing, highly critical mother who views you as a fundamentally flawed project.
Right.
That alienation within your own family unit, that really becomes the bedrock of her horror fiction later on.
It's the ultimate betrayal, right? The
Yes.
people who are biologically mandated to love and protect you are actually the ones judging you the harshest. So she finally escapes. She goes to Syracuse University.
The huge turning point.
Oh, massive. This is where the world opens up for her. She gets involved with the campus literary magazine, and she meets Stanley Edgar Hyman. Now, Stanley is a Jewish intellectual, a really sharp literary critic. Marrying him in 1940 was basically Shirley taking a match to her mother's pristine country club expectations.
It was a conscious, permanent break from her family's provincial worldview. So they moved to New York briefly, and then they eventually settle in North Bennington, Vermont.
Right, because Stanley lands a faculty position at Bennington College.
Exactly. And here is where the architecture of her dual life really gets built. Over the years, they have 4 children, spaced almost exactly 3 years apart. Lawrence, Joanne, Sarah, and Barry.
And this is where I really want to focus on how she managed this life. Because it is staggering when you think about it. She is essentially running 2 completely separate realities inside one house.
At the same time.
Yes. Reality A, she is raising 4 kids in the 1950s. She is doing the cooking, tracking down the missing little car wheels, managing the dogs, dealing with the laundry.
All the domestic chaos.
All of it. And she monetizes this. She starts writing these light-hearted domestic memoirs like Life Among the Savages in 1953 and Raising Demons in 1957.
And these were massive hits. I mean, she was selling these essays to Women's Day, McCall's, Good Housekeeping. She perfectly captured the exhaustion and the absurdity of the nuclear family.
She famously wrote about being caught in a round of hemlines and chocolate pudding.
Yeah, that quote just sums it up.
It does. But then you have reality B. In the exact same physical space, amidst the pudding and the hemlines, she is writing novels like Hanxman in 1951 and The Bird's Nest in 1954.
Novels dripping with psychological dread.
Yes. Unraveling minds and profound terror. I mean, I always assumed an author would need a remote cabin in the woods to switch gears into horror. How do you write a masterpiece of terror while a toddler is literally pulling on your skirt?
Well, the thing is, you don't switch gears. That is the critical insight from her biographer, Ruth Franklin. The 2 worlds were actually one ecosystem.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The tension of being pulled in a dozen different directions, being a mother, a faculty wife, the primary breadwinner, and a serious artist. That tension is the horror. The dread didn't exist outside the domestic sphere. The domestic sphere was the engine generating the dread.
Wow. That makes the horror so much more intimate. And honestly, looking at the societal pressures of the 1950s, the environment she was in sounds genuinely suffocating.
Oh, completely. She was getting boxed in from every conceivable angle. Her own mother is still writing her letters, pressuring her to write ephemeral fluff instead of gloomy stories.
Ephemeral fluff, that's so dismissive.
And the judgment was coming from her intellectual peers, too. The bohemian circles she and Stanley ran in, these are artists, critics, academics, they looked down on women who actively wanted a traditional family life.
Because it wasn't avant-garde enough.
Exactly. A contemporary noted how difficult it was for women in that specific college town set to admit they actually liked being mothers. So the traditionalists judge her for being dark and weird, and the avant-garde intellectuals judge her for wanting a clean kitchen and happy kids.
She just couldn't win. There is this anecdote from Life Among the Savages that we have to talk about because it is the most perfect, infuriating distillation of her existence.
Oh, the hospital scene.
Yes. She is checking into the hospital to give birth to her 3rd child. The nurse is filling out the intake paperwork and asks for her occupation.
Shirley says, writer.
Right. And the nurse, without missing a beat, says, I'll just put down housewife.
Which is just right.
Shirley corrects her, writer. The nurse refuses. I'll just put down housewife. It is maddening. Shirley Jackson is literally paying the bills. She is the primary breadwinner for the Hyman family through her national magazine publications and book advances. And with a flick of a pen, her entire professional identity is erased by societal default.
Think about the toll that takes on a person, the systemic erasure of female creative labor. And even within the walls of her own home, The power dynamics were incredibly skewed.
Right, because of Stanley.
Right. Despite Jackson bringing in the bulk of the money, Stanley completely controlled the finances. He doled out her own earnings to her like an allowance.
Not to mention his personal life. The sources detail how he maintained an open relationship, frequently having affairs with his own college students.
Right.
Shirley agreed to it on paper, but the reality of it caused her profound suffering.
So you really start to see the walls closing in on her. She is stuck playing the role of the dutiful faculty wife in this small New England town. A town, by the way, that actively shunned them.
Because they were too progressive, right?
Exactly. The Hymans were known for hosting these vibrant, intellectually diverse parties. They associated with black intellectuals, like the author Ralph Ellison, as absolute equals. And in 1950s rural Vermont, the townspeople gossiped about them and ostracized them for it.
If you are listening to this and thinking about your own neighborhood, think about the subtle, polite ways communities decide who belongs and who doesn't. Jackson felt that icy politeness every single day. She found joy in her children, absolutely, but she had to wedge her writing into what the sources call the interstices, the cracks and crevices of her daily routine.
Right, the margins of her day.
She used the home to explore her own exhaustion and resentment.
Which is a brilliant mechanism, honestly. She takes the very thing that is draining her, the house, the village, the domestic routine, and turns it into the weapon of her fiction.
And if the inside of the house was a pressure cooker, the idyllic small town surrounding it was the fire underneath. Which leads us perfectly to June 26, 1948, the day American literature was permanently altered by a story published in The New Yorker.
The lottery. It is really hard to find an American who hasn't encountered this story at some point in their education.
Most of us read it in middle or high school, but reading it as an adult, you realize how incredibly manipulative Jackson is with the pacing.
Oh, she's a master at it.
Let's look at the mechanics of how she sets the trap. So it opens on a beautiful, clear summer day. It's June 27th, a bucolic, unnamed American village.
The kids are out of school, they're gathering stones, making piles in the town square.
Yeah, and it reads like the opening of a Hallmark movie about a 4th of July picnic.
She completely weaponizes the mundane. The dialogue is full of folksy chatter. The men are talking about planting and rain. The women are gossiping. Mr. Summers, who runs the local coal business, and Mr. Graves, the postmaster, they bring out this splintered, faded black box.
The entire atmosphere is designed to lull the reader into absolute complacency.
Right, it's just a civic tradition, right? Old Man Warner mutters that old proverb, lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. They're just doing what they've always done to ensure the harvest.
But then the pacing shifts, the names are called, the heads of households draw slips of paper, and Bill Hutchinson gets the slip with the black spot.
And notice how the horror doesn't come from a monster jumping out. The horror comes from Tessie Hutchinson's reaction. Tessie, who was just joking around with her neighbors 5 minutes ago, instantly starts screaming that it isn't fair.
She claims Mr. Summers rushed her husband.
Which is the most brutally honest human reaction. The system, the tradition, is perfectly fine and acceptable right up until the exact moment it targets you.
Exactly. Then the Hutchinson family does a second draw among themselves. Tessie draws the black spot, and the story concludes with the entire village closing in on her, her friends, the women she was just gossiping with.
Even her own young son, Davy, is handed a few pebbles.
Yeah, that part always gets me. And they stone her to death as she screams that it isn't fair.
When that issue of The New Yorker hit the newsstands, the reaction was seismic. I mean, the magazine received a torrent of mail, more than they had ever received in response to a work of fiction.
And we are not talking about fan mail. Jackson said she was getting 10 to 12 forwarded letters a day for months. Out of hundreds of letters, she said maybe 13 were actually kind.
Wow.
People were furious. They canceled their subscriptions. Her mother wrote to her and essentially said, "Dad and I didn't care for it at all. Why don't you write something to cheer people up?"
But if you look at the letters she received, they reveal something fascinating about the American psyche in 1948. Jackson categorized the hate mail into 3 buckets: bewilderment, speculation, and plain old-fashioned abuse. Readers simply could not process what they had read.
Some of the letters are almost comical in their density. The encyclopedic sources note that she was amazed by the sheer number of readers who wrote in asking where these lotteries were held.
Right, so they could travel there and watch one.
It's insane. Or the people who assumed Tessie Hutchinson was going to win a Bendix washing machine and were, like, confused by the rocks.
The fact that people wanted to go watch it proves the entire dark thesis of the story. Humans have a deep, latent appetite for sanctioned violence.
I really
In
do.
fact, the Union of South Africa banned the story outright, and Jackson loved that.
She took it as a compliment.
She took immense pride in the ban. She noted that South Africa actually understood the story perfectly, considering they were a society that used stoning and brutal systemic violence to maintain order.
So when academics tear this story apart, what are they looking at? Because we know it's not just a scary story about rocks.
One of the most compelling lenses is the sociological and literary analysis of the naming conventions. Helena Baker wrote a brilliant piece breaking this down. Jackson didn't just pick names out of a hat.
Okay, let's hear it.
Mr. Summers, who runs the lottery, represents the season of excess, of pagan sacrifice. Mr. Graves, his assistant, literally brings the specter of death.
And what about the villagers, like the ordinary people who enthusiastically participate?
This is where it gets chilling. Nabeker points out that the surname Martin, as in the family that helps hold the black box, derives from a Middle English word signifying an ape or monkey. It represents the primal, savage nature hiding just beneath our polite clothes.
Wow.
And then you have Mrs. Delacroix. Delacroix translates to of the cross, but the villagers vulgarize the pronunciation to Delacroix.
So it is a corrupted, perverted version of Christianity.
Exactly. And who is Mrs. Delacroix? At the beginning of the story, she is Tessie's friend. They chat amicably. But when the stoning begins, Mrs. Delacroix is the one who selects a stone so massive she needs both hands to pick it up.
Ah, that's right.
It is a direct indictment of the hypocrisy of polite religious society.
That makes my blood run cold. Just the idea of your neighbor picking up a boulder. But I want to look at the exact date that was published. June 26th, 1948. We are 3 years out from the end of World War II.
The timing is everything. The global audience had just witnessed the absolute extremes of systemic human violence, the Holocaust, the dropping of the atomic bombs. But domestically, in the United States, something highly specific had just happened.
2 days before the story was published, the Military Selective Service Act was enacted, reinstating the military draft.
Right, so you have a story hitting mailboxes about average citizens, young men, families, being randomly selected by a government entity to die, published 48 hours after the draft is brought back.
The parallels are unavoidable.
It is a profound critique. Critic Patrick J. Shields argues it also maps onto the arbitrary nature of capital punishment. But if you drill down to the bedrock, Jackson is attacking the concept of blind obedience. Why do they do the lottery? Old Man Warner's only defense is there's always been a lottery.
Right, it's just tradition.
It is the terrifying reality that ordinary people will commit unspeakable atrocities simply because the system tells them it is normal.
I am struggling with one piece of this, though. If she is writing a critique of the draft or the Holocaust or capital punishment, why set it in a sunny farming village? If you want to write about the horrors of systemic violence, why not set it in a dystopian city or a war zone where violence makes visual sense to the reader?
I look at it differently. Setting it in that idyllic, sunny village isn't a distraction from her point. It is the point. Remember, Jackson modeled this town after her own village of North Bennington. In the late 1940s and 1950s, the American small town and the rising suburbs were being aggressively marketed as the ultimate safe havens. They were pitched as the antidote to the chaotic, dangerous world.
Right, the whole leave your doors unlocked myth.
Jackson is holding a mirror up to that exact myth and saying, you are lying to yourselves. The true horror isn't a foreign army or a monster in the woods. The true horror is the arbitrary cruelty, the prejudice, and the blind obedience of the people you borrow sugar from.
If you think about your neighborhood group chat, or like your local homeowners association, there is always that underlying current of judgment disguised as politeness. Jackson just took that polite suburban judgment, removed the filter, and handed it a rock.
That is a perfect way to frame it, and to really understand how she constructed these perfect, terrifying little traps for her readers. We need to look at the physical evidence of her mind. We have to look at how she actually worked.
Which means we are heading into the archives. One of our sources today is the actual finding aid for the Shirley Jackson papers, held at the Library of Congress. And let me tell you, just reading the inventory list of this archive gives you an incredibly tactile sense of who she was.
The sheer volume is staggering. We are talking about roughly 7,500 items, spanning from 1932 to 1991. It occupies 20.6 linear feet of shelf space.
Just visualize that if you're listening. Imagine a minivan completely stuffed with paper. You have her high school diary starting in 1932. You have her college notebooks from Syracuse.
You have folders full of pencil and ink drawings.
Yeah, because she was also a talented visual artist who drew these incredibly witty, sharp cartoons. You have royalty statements, engagement calendars, and just mountains of drafts.
The finding aid is also a window into her most foundational relationships. There was a specific file containing letters from Stanley Edgar Hyman, written while they were still students at Syracuse.
And the archivist's description of those letters is so revealing. It notes that Stanley's letters veer wildly from the intellectually precocious to the highly sexually suggestive.
It proves that despite everything that happened later, his infidelities, his financial control, their bond was originally built on a very deep, passionate intellectual equality. They built an entire life around literature. At one point, their personal home library was estimated at 25,000 books.
I can't even fathom moving that many boxes.
I know.
But scanning this finding aid, you also see the insane breadth of her creativity. We peg her as the horror writer or the funny mom writer, but she was experimenting constantly.
The unpublished works listed in the archive are fascinating. There is a one-act musical play she wrote for children based on Hansel and Gretel, titled The Bad Children. She wrote actual children's books like Nine Magic Wishes and Famous Sally.
And then sitting right next to those children's books in the folders, you see these intriguing, darker story titles like The Honeymoon of Mrs. Smith and literally a piece titled Jack the Ripper.
The juxtaposition is wild.
It is. But what I find most compelling is the physical organization of the boxes themselves. Like, what does the way a writer files their work tell us about their brain?
Well, in the Library of Congress, Jackson's literary files are strictly divided into two main categories: her supernatural tales and her stories of contemporary domestic life.
But the fact that they are housed together, that she was physically moving between these folders on a daily basis, it's like looking at the blueprints of a haunted house and finding the secret passageway she built between the sunny 1950s kitchen and the subterranean dungeon. They were part of the same structure. Looking at the sheer volume of these papers, over 20 feet of files, it completely shatters the romantic myth of the writer for me.
How so?
Well, we have this cultural image of the tortured artist, right?
Yeah.
Someone staring out a rainy window, waiting for the muse to strike by candlelight. But 20 feet of drafts, that tells me she was a machine. Between the cooking, the laundry, and managing 4 kids, she never stopped typing.
She really treated writing as a rigorous, relentless blue-collar discipline. The archives are packed with her endless, meticulous revisions, her crossed-out outlines, her structural notes. People praised her for her effortless prose, but the archives prove it was anything but effortless.
Right, she worked for every word.
She was actively, consciously wrestling the mundane details of her exhausting life into these highly polished narratives. She was an architect.
And that brings us to her ultimate architectural masterpiece. Let's talk about the novel that took all of her thematic obsessions, domesticity, isolation, the suffocating nature of the family unit, and forged them into a diamond. 1959, The Haunting of Hill House.
Widely regarded by critics and peers as one of the greatest ghost stories ever written in the English language. Stephen King essentially bows down to it as a foundational text of modern horror.
For the listener who hasn't read it, or maybe hasn't read it recently, let's set up the pieces on the board. Our protagonist is Eleanor Vance. She is 32 years old, unmarried, and her life has been a portrait of absolute grinding misery.
It's so bleak.
For the last 11 years, she has been the sole caretaker for her domineering, invalid mother. She has no friends, she has no money, she doesn't even have a bedroom. She sleeps on a cot in the living room of her married sister's house.
She is a woman entirely without agency or a home. When her mother finally dies, Eleanor receives a strange invitation. A paranormal investigator named Dr. Montague is renting a notorious property called Hill House for the summer to study supernatural phenomena.
And he invites Eleanor because of a poltergeist incident from her childhood.
Right. So Eleanor does the first rebellious thing in her life. She steals the car that she technically co-owns with her terrible sister, and she drives off to Hill House. Once there, she joins Dr. Montague, a bohemian psychic named Theodora, and Luke, the young heir who stands to inherit the house.
Now, if we look at how the academic world has analyzed this novel for the past few decades, the prevailing theory has been somewhat rigid. The traditional literary critique views the story fundamentally as a tragedy of a broken woman.
Right. If you read the standard essays from critics like Roberta Rubinstein or Judy Newman, they argue that Hill House itself represents a monstrous, consuming mother figure. The idea is that Eleanor's entire journey is a desperate attempt to break away from the psychological grip of her dead mother, but she is too weak.
The house acts as a surrogate mother, preying on her fragile psyche, dissolving her boundaries, and ultimately reabsorbing her.
Because at the climax of the novel, Eleanor is essentially possessed by the house. The rest of the group realizes she is losing her mind, and they force her to pack her bags and leave for her own safety.
And as Eleanor is driving her car down the long driveway, heading back to the real world, she makes a conscious decision. She turns the wheel, deliberately crashes her car into a massive oak tree, and dies.
And the traditional academic view looks at that crash and says, tragic defeat, she failed to achieve independence, she couldn't break the maternal bond, and so she commits suicide. Case closed.
But that is where our source material today completely flips the script. We are looking at a brilliant counterargument published in the Irish Journal of Gothic and Horror Studies by scholar Brittany Roberts. And Roberts posits something entirely different. The Haunting of Hill House is not a tragedy. It is a triumphant domestic fairy tale operating in a Gothic disguise.
I am so obsessed with this interpretation.
It's amazing to really understand how Roberts builds this case. We have to look really closely at the beginning of the book when Eleanor is driving the stolen car to the house. She is finally alone. She has hours to just think, and she spends the entire drive lost in these vivid daydreams. And what is she daydreaming about? She is daydreaming about impenetrable sanctuaries.
It is so revealing. She imagines a tiny cottage hidden behind a wall of poisonous oleander trees, specifically designed to keep everyone else away. She imagines a grand house guarded by stone lions that she can wash and talk to non-human companions.
Right, she dreams of sewing thick white curtains and living in absolute pristine isolation.
So when she finally pulls up to Hill House, what does she find? It perfectly matches her fairy tale desires. It's just painted black instead of pink. She wanted a barrier. Hill House is surrounded by heavy, locked iron gates. She wanted a stone lion to guard her.
It comes with Mr. Dudley.
Yes, the dark, menacing caretaker who aggressively keeps the outside world at bay. The property is completely abstracted from the rules of normal society.
Roberts introduces a concept here from anthropology regarding how people interact with their homes. It's the idea of an environment accommodating a person. Hill House doesn't just put a roof over Eleanor's head, it shifts its reality to fulfill her deepest, most private psychological needs.
Eleanor has spent 32 years being unloved and burdensome to her biological family. But she walks into Hill House, and she instantly thinks of a line from an old song. Journeys end in lovers' meeting.
The house isn't attacking her, the house is loving her.
Precisely. It is providing the constant, unwavering, non-human devotion she has been starving for.
But wait, I have to stop you there. What about the terrifying parts of the book? There is that incredibly famous, chilling scene where Eleanor and Theodora are huddled together in the pitch black of their bedroom.
Oh, the hallway scene.
Yes, something massive is violently pounding on the doors down the hallway, getting closer and closer, and amidst the booming, they hear a thin little giggle. It's horrifying. How does a fairy tale reading explain that?
Well, under the old traditional reading that pounding is a demon, or it's the monstrous mother trying to violently force her way into Eleanor's mind. But under Roberts' reading, it isn't a demon at all. It is the house using its psychic energy to manifest Eleanor's own deeply buried, joyful childhood self.
Wait, the giggle is Eleanor.
Yes. The house is trying to reach her. It isn't trying to destroy her. It is trying to help her self-actualize. It is trying to strip away the frightened, subservient adult woman and resurrect the part of her that was capable of joy.
And what about the writing on the wall? Later in the book, someone or something uses chalk or blood to write a massive message in the hallway. Help Eleanor come home? And later it happens again in Theodora's room. The room is destroyed, and Theodora's beautiful, bright, modern clothes are covered in blood.
And how does Eleanor react to that violence against her friend?
She secretly smiles. She is glad it happened.
Exactly. Roberts argues that this message isn't a threat. It is a territorial marking. The house is publicly claiming Eleanor. It is elevating her status above the rest of the group. By ruining Theodora's clothes, the house is explicitly rejecting the bright, modern, highly social world that Theodora represents.
And in doing so, it validates Eleanor's own secret jealousy and dislike of her.
The house is literally taking Eleanor's side in a petty roommate fight.
Okay, I see how the house is accommodating her, but I still have to push back on the ending. I cannot get past the tree.
The car crash.
Right. She gets in her car, she steps on the gas, and she drives her vehicle into a massive oak tree. She is dead. How, in any universe, can we frame a suicide as a happy, fairy tale ending.
I understand the friction there. To
Yeesh.
resolve it, we have to look at the mechanics of literary storytelling. We have to separate the atmosphere of the story from the structure of the story.
Okay.
Jackson is using the atmosphere of a ghost story, the dark hallways, the chills, the death, to tell the structural story of Cinderella finding her castle.
Okay, unpack that for me.
We only view her death as a tragedy because we are conditioned by society to believe that a woman's happy ending requires specific things. We are programmed to think that winning means getting married, rejoining polite society, maybe having a family. But remember Jackson's universe. Remember the lottery.
Oh, right.
In Shirley Jackson's world, conventional human families and normal suburban society are the true, literal horrors.
Ugh.
So for Eleanor, being forced to pack her bags, leave the grounds of Hill House, and go back to sleeping on a cot in her sister's living room, that is the actual nightmare.
Going back to the real world is a fate worse than death for her. So, by crashing her car into the tree on the property line, she ensures she never has to leave. She permanently merges her spirit with the house. She achieves her enchanted kingdom of total isolation. She finally gets a home of her own.
If you look at what Eleanor actually wants throughout the novel, the crash is her ultimate victory.
Exactly.
That completely reorganizes how I process that book. Calling it a tragedy is just applying our own cultural biases to a character who actively hates our culture. She wanted out and she found the exit door.
Madness and death, within the specific framework of this novel, aren't defeats. They are the supreme forms of liberation.
It's beautiful in a very dark way. But this is where the story of Shirley Jackson takes a deeply painful turn into reality. Because Eleanor's desperate final retreat into the walls of Hill House eerily, tragically foreshadowed the final years of Jackson's own life. It is a textbook case of life imitating art. In the early 1960s, shortly after the massive success of The Haunting of Hill House, Jackson's physical and mental health began a steep, severe decline.
Let's talk about the physical reality first. She was a very heavy smoker throughout her life, which led to chronic, debilitating asthma. She suffered from severe joint pain, profound exhaustion, fainting spells stemming from an undiagnosed heart condition, and colitis.
Simply moving around the house, let alone traveling, became physically agonizing for her.
But the psychological toll was even heavier, and it compounded the physical ailments. She developed severe agoraphobia. By the time she was writing her final completed masterpiece, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, published in 1962.
Which, I have to point out the irony, is a novel entirely about two sisters who completely isolate themselves inside their family estate after a mass poisoning.
Refusing to engage with the hostile village outside.
Yes. While writing a book about extreme, defiant isolation, Jackson herself became entirely housebound. Her anxieties grew so severe that she could not leave her bedroom, let alone walk out the front door.
The boundary of the deadbolt we talked about at the beginning became the absolute limit of her world.
And the medical context of the early 1960s made her situation infinitely worse. Today, we have a much better understanding of mental health and pharmacology, but back then, her doctors prescribed her heavy doses of barbiturates tranquilizers to manage her crippling anxiety.
But simultaneously, they were prescribing her amphetamines for weight loss because she was still dealing with the societal and personal pressures regarding her physical appearance.
It is a chemical nightmare. She is on a brutal seesaw, taking uppers just to have the energy to function and lose weight, and then taking heavy downers to suppress the crushing panic attacks.
And on top of the prescription cascade, the sources detail how she was heavily self-medicating with alcohol.
She was drinking to cope with the isolation of being trapped in North Bennington, to numb the pain of her husband's constant brazen infidelities, and to manage the sheer pressure of being the financial engine for a family of 6 while her body was breaking down.
This combination, the asthma, the heart issues, the tranquilizers, the amphetamines, the alcohol, it completely devastated her system. And on August 8th, 1965, Shirley Jackson went to take a nap and died in her sleep from sudden cardiac arrest. She was only 48 years old.
Wow, 48. It is an unfathomable loss for the literary world. When you think about what she could have written in the 70s and 80s, it's heartbreaking. And the tragic irony of her life is impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
Jackson spent her career writing brilliant, subversive fictions about women finding power, liberation, and sanctuary by locking out the world and retreating into the architecture of the home. But in reality, her own sanctuary became a genuine, inescapable physical and psychological prison.
It's as if she spent her life building a fortress of words so thick and so strong that eventually she couldn't find her own way out of it.
That is exactly what happened.
So, when we step back and look at the entirety of this deep dive, the archives, the stories, the struggles, how do we measure her legacy today? Is she a tragic victim of the restrictive 1950s, or is she a pioneer who completely transcended her era?
Oh, she is undeniably a pioneer. You cannot overstate her victory on the page. Despite the immense physical and emotional suffering she endured in that house, her mind conquered the culture. She single-handedly redefined the American Gothic.
Before Shirley Jackson, if you wanted to read a ghost story, you were reading about drafty European castles, brooding counts, and foggy moors.
Exactly. Jackson took those ghosts, dragged them across the ocean, and placed them squarely in the brightly lit, modern American living room.
She made the horrors domestic. She forced post-war society to look directly at the claustrophobia of the nuclear family, the inherent cruelty of the manicured suburbs, and the crushing psychological weight placed on women.
Her influence is everywhere. The Shirley Jackson Awards are now one of the most prestigious honors for outstanding achievement in psychological suspense and horror. Writers who define our modern era, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, Donna Tartt, Richard Matheson, they all point to her as the foundation of their work.
And there's one final, incredibly surreal twist of fate regarding her legacy. Remember North Bennington?
Oh, yes.
The small insular Vermont town that gossiped about her, shunned her for her progressive views, and made her feel like an outcast. Today, that very same town celebrates Shirley Jackson Day every single year, and they hold it on June 27th.
The exact date that the villagers gather in the square in the lottery.
It is the most fitting, darkly ironic tribute possible for a writer who understood the complexities and the hypocrisies of the village better than anyone else alive.
She showed us that the structures we build to keep ourselves safe, our traditions, our polite smiles, our houses, can be the very things that end up haunting us the most.
We have traveled a really long way today. From the sunny, blood-stained village square of the lottery to the claustrophobic, fiercely protective and accommodating halls of Hill House. We've explored the mind of a woman who managed to be, simultaneously, America's wittiest, most relatable housewife and its most terrifying, uncompromising architect of domestic horror.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the space around you.
It really does. Which brings me right back to where we started this conversation. Tonight, when you walk up to your house, when you step inside and close the front door and you throw that heavy deadbolt, take a moment to listen to the sound it makes. And ask yourself, are you locking the terrifying, chaotic world out? Or are you perhaps willingly locking yourself in with the ghosts you prefer? And if it is the latter, is that really a tragedy?